Michael Wood is the new immigration minister after the Prime Minister announced a cabinet reshuffle this week. But the change comes at a critical time in the COVID-19 recovery, as New Zealand loses more people than it gains. Statistics New Zealand says Aotearoa had a net migration loss of almost 9,000 people in the year to the end of April. Erica Stanford is National's immigration spokesperson. Kia ora, welcome to Q&A.
Good morning.
You surprised by those numbers?
No, I'm not surprised at all. They're very shocking.
Why is that?
I'm not surprised because when you break them down and you look at them, who are the people that are leaving? It's not Kiwis, it's migrants. And why are migrants leaving? Well, it's because we've treated them so poorly over the last 4 or 5 years. They've been in queues that last a mile long. They've just been transferred into a new queue that lasts another 2 years. They've been split from their families. They've really just had enough. We keep shifting the goalposts on them. So all of those nurses, those teachers, those doctors, those truck drivers, people we desperately need here have gone, well, thanks very much, but actually I've got a better deal in Australia, so I'm out of here.
We've seen some significant changes to policy settings over immigration in the last few months. When do you expect that net migration loss will become a net migration gain?
I think we're in this for the long term. This is the first time we've seen a net migration loss since 2011, since the earthquakes, right? And I think we're going to be in this for the long term. And the reason being is because there is a global war on talent. So every country in the world is after those same amazingly talented migrants. And we are not putting ourselves in a position to be able to compete with the likes of Australia, Canada, the US, the UK, to attract the best talent. So I think this is going to be a trend for a long time. Not only not attracting migrants, but not being able to retain Kiwis in New Zealand.
What role should migration play in our economic recovery from COVID-19?
It's a huge critical factor. I mean, you look at Adrian Orr when he hiked the OCR for the second time just recently. His comments were that this is the biggest handbrake on our economic recovery. If we want to get ourselves out of the sort of death spiral of inflation, we need to grow our economy. And right now, we've got CEOs of businesses working on the shop floor. They can't grow their company because they're busy washing dishes or growing plants. And we've got, you've seen restaurants in Queenstown closed 2 days a week. How is that good for our productivity? How is that good for our economic growth? We need to be attracting the best migrants, and the policy changes over the last little while have done exactly the opposite.
Okay, let's talk through some of those policy changes. So at the start of last month, the government introduced what it called an immigration rebalance, including a green list, which targets professional migrants in 85 different high-skilled roles and gives them a fast track to citizenship. Do you support that process?
Well, funnily enough, I'd say last year, if you go back and look at National's policy around COVID, one of the parts of that I wrote, and that had on it a health workforce strategy where I said, look, give these people residence as they walk off the plane. We should be rolling out the red carpet for health workers. We don't want to see people dying because they can't get into the emergency department and be seen, which is exactly what's happening right now. So that was our policy. It's taken the government over a year to put in place that exact same policy, but they still managed to bugger it up. We've still got nurses on a 2-year wait for residence. They can go to Australia and get residence immediately. The same in Canada, the same in the US.
Canada's 6 months. I checked it out. Canada's 6 months. US is a year to 18 months. So faster than New Zealand, absolutely, but not necessarily immediately.
They do have fast-track policies though, and in Australia you can go there straight away. I mean, our main competitor is Australia, right? They're our main competitor. They're the ones trying to get our nurses over there, and you can get residence almost immediately in Australia. So if you were a nurse overseas, maybe in the Philippines or India or the UK, thinking, where am I going to go? Are you going to go to New Zealand, where it takes 2 years plus visa processing time, which, by the way, takes 45 months at the moment for an essential skills, a skilled migrant visa? Or are you going to go to Australia, where, frankly, you're paid a bit more, better cost of living, and you can get residence immediately?
So would you lose the two-tiered nature of the green list? Would you just have everyone on that green list, every single role, immediately able to apply for residency?
I would probably be a bit more nuanced. And I don't have all the facts and figures, but certainly for those healthcare workers, the nurses, the midwives, straight to residence. There's no reason that they're on a 2-year list, and I think we've proved that over the last few weeks with Farfoy making some misleading comments to the public around that. The others, you can certainly take a look at it, because there is a really elegant solution in the Immigration Act, right? It's called Section 49, which basically says you can give immediate residence to someone, but it is conditional on them working in their job or in their sector for however long you want. You can put whatever conditions on you want. So if there is a reason to keep people in the sector or in their job, you can use that section of the Immigration Act. I don't know why the Minister has chosen not to use that for some
I mean,
jobs.
certainty is the issue for employers right now, right? And we put your concerns to Chris Farfoy and to Health Minister Andrew Little, and both of them said the reason that nurses, for example, are on the 2-year list as opposed to the immediate residency list is because there is concern that when they arrive in New Zealand, despite having agreed to take a job, they might then change jobs within a very short period of time. Well, if certainty is something that we're trying to give employers, isn't that a worthy consideration?
Not at all. That is completely ridiculous. Think about it logically. If you are a trained nurse overseas with years of experience, you come to New Zealand, you spend $10,000 doing a CAP course to get registered, you get your residence. You seriously think those nurses are going to go, I've had enough of nursing, I'm going to go own a restaurant? Of course not. And to tell you what, the most important thing is none of the evidence is there to back it up. So I've had the minister up on this, and he was not able to provide a shred of evidence. He got it mixed up. What the real problem is that nurses are switching between aged care facilities and the DHB. That's they're not leaving nursing, they're just switching between the two, and the aged care providers, and fair enough, said, hey, look, can you help us out by helping us retain these workers for a few years before they switch.
But isn't that the same thing? Certainty.
No, it's not. All we needed to do was to say Section 49 of the Immigration Act. If you come in to be an aged care nurse, you can have residence straight away, buy a house, do all those things, but you need to stay in the aged care sector for 2 years. He's created the same conditions still exist with 2 years. They can still switch between the two. So he totally buggered it up.
The Productivity Commission has just released its report into immigration settings in New Zealand. Recommendation 24, quote, the government should discontinue the issuance of new permanent resident visas for new residents and require new residents to renew their resident visas every 6 years. Would a national government support that?
It's something we're certainly open to looking at. I mean, you saw in the global pandemic, all of these people come back who hadn't been in New Zealand for 20 or 30 years, they were permanent residents. So there is an argument for that. It's certainly something that we're certainly open to looking at. I mean, we've spent about $5 million on this report, and I have a feeling that the government are going to quietly slide it to one side and not look at many of their recommendations, because frankly, a lot of them are what I've been saying for a long time. But there are some other good points they make in there that are worthy of consideration.
What role should iwi play in setting our migration settings in the years to come?
Well, a huge role. I mean, they're a treaty partner, right? And so they have a say in that. And I work really closely with the Māori members of my caucus and also the special interest group, the Māori special interest group that sit within the National Party around this. And certainly any policy that we come up with needs to be consulted on with iwi as well.
At the start of last month, the government, at the interview with Chris Farfoy, he pushed back on his initial timeframes when it came to the issuance of the 200,000 one-off 2021 special fast-track visas. When do you expect those will be processed and completed?
That's a really great question. So he said 80% in 12 months. And then he said 80% in 18 months, but still striving for 12 months. But actually, if you look at what they're on track for, we're not on track to have them finished, 80% finished, for well over 2 years. So, as I said earlier, they've taken the one big queue of resident visas that they'd had, and they've just transferred them to a new queue. And that is why you are seeing people leave New Zealand. 1 in 5
British applicants have had their residency decided from that list, but just 1 in 12 Chinese applicants. Why is that?
Well, that's because Immigration New Zealand are making them do a national security check. And they do that with certain countries. They've got a secret list. They don't tell anyone, but you can pretty much work out who's on it. And they make them do an extra security check, and that security check takes months and months and months and months. And so that's why you see that with Chinese applicants and a few others as well. And they're, rightly pretty upset about that.
If a national government is elected next year, what would be an appropriate annual net migration figure for the 3-year term?
You asked Chris Farfoy a very similar question, and he didn't answer you. And he didn't answer you for a good reason, because it's so difficult to tell at the moment. We've just given, well, it was supposed to be 165,000 people residents. That's going to be massively blown out, right? So we don't know where that's going to end up, because there are a lot of overseas migrants being attracted into that policy by way of family reunification. But the real question we need to be asking is not what's the upper limit, because I tell you what, migrants don't want to come here. That's the problem we've got. The problem we've got is migrants are leaving. Net 8,700 migrants are leaving. We can't attract migrants here for love nor money at the moment. What we need to be looking at is our immigration settings, but not only our immigration settings, our wider policy settings, because would you come to New Zealand right now with the cost of living, can't buy a house, someone's being shot at in Auckland every single night. So there's all of that to consider as well as to how we actually attract people here.
But I'm interested to know, if you have your way and you are able to adjust those settings in the way in which you desire, would we be looking at annual net migration of 50,000, 60,000 again?
It would be irresponsible of me at the moment to say what that will be, given what we are actually staring down the barrel is of long-term net losses for quite some time. And I've talked to a number of economists, and they're saying this is going to be a long-term problem. It's all very well to go, oh, I'd like this many people to come, but actually the difficulty is getting them here in the first place. This government have found that out, and we'll probably be in a very similar situation where it's not about the upper limit, it's about just trying to get them in the door. And there are so many swing variables. How many New Zealanders are leaving? How can we attract new migrants? So, you know, at this point in time, a year out from an election, and Farfoy couldn't even answer your question now, and he was the minister. You know, you come back and ask me again in a year, let's take a look at how many Kiwis are leaving, how many migrants we've managed to attract, and then we'll have another conversation.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you very much. National Immigration Spokesperson Erica Stanford.